Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kajol and today we are going to be covering how consultants solve problems, and there's thousands of ways, and we're going to focus on my favorite one being design thinking. And it's all about being human-centric, putting yourself into the shoes of that end user, that customer, that employee who's actually going to be using that product. Now, when we use design thinking, we are finding that sweet spot of innovation. And that means that you find solutions that they have these three characteristics. Firstly, is that solution desirable? Is it actually solving a pain point of your customer? Is it solving a problem that your customer has, and do they really need it? Secondly, is it viable? Is it actually bringing in some money to the business, and is the business model sustainable? And then thirdly, feasibility. With the capabilities and the technology that we have today, is it actually easy to implement? Sounds simple, but so effective. And S&P companies that actually use this, like Nike and Disney, they actually outperform the rest of the index by 211%. So there is so much power when you use this process. And consulting firms are using it today to come up with new strategies, to build new business processes, and even build new apps and websites as well. And by the end of this video, you are going to know the 5 steps of design thinking, and you'll be able to implement that on your projects as well. So what is design thinking? And I've mentioned it's a philosophy, a tool that allows you to solve problems, but it really focuses on the needs of the user rather than the needs of the business, and that's what sets it apart. So rather than thinking of the problem for the business, like not being able to hit a revenue target, you're focusing on the problem for the user and creating tailored solutions for that end user. So this process isn't something which you just do a big reveal at the end. You involve the customers, the employees right from the beginning, get their input, and you actually involve your clients as well, so they feel ownership and they take ownership of that end solution. I would say that this approach is best used when you're trying to solve a problem for a specific group of people. So for instance, when you're trying to build a strategy to bring in more 20 to 25-year-olds, for instance, or build processes for the finance division, or maybe even build a website or app for, Tesco customers as well. So enough of my waffle, let's go on to the 5 steps to design thinking. And the first one is to empathize with that user. In this stage, your aim is to collect as much data as you can about who your end users are, how they feel, what they do. And I end up doing, one-to-one interviews, workshops, or sending out surveys, but there's hundreds of ways you can do this. Now, some of the key questions that you want to ask is, what are their needs? What are their goals? What are their motivations? And what really frustrates them? And what are their pain points? There's this amazing quote which I love, and it goes along the lines of, we spend a lot of time designing the bridge, but not enough time thinking about the people who actually are crossing them. So it may sound obvious about these questions, but actually weirdly, no one asks them, and common sense really isn't that common in business. Most of the time, you want to ask really open-ended questions to reveal what people find really important to them. So a few of them are explorative questions, so forcing expansion on new points of view, so something along the lines of, have you thought about? Another one is effective questions, revealing what people feel about something. Another one is reflective questions, where you're encouraging more elaboration along the lines of, what do you think causes? And then analytical questions, where you look a little bit deeper into the roots of the problem. Another one is probing questions, where you're examining something a bit more. Can you describe how? And lastly, clarifying questions, which helps you to align and avoid misunderstandings. So you mean that, and you're actually just playing back what they said. These open-ended questions are awesome to start a conversation, but when we're trying to go a little bit deeper, understand the root of the problem, we use this technique called the 5 whys. So essentially, you'll be asking 5 whys, and by the end of the 5th why, you'll get to the root cause of that problem. Here's an example. People don't buy products in our online store. Why? Because they didn't complete that purchase, they drop off. Why? Because they tend to abandon the shopping cart. Why? Because the cart is where we show shopping details and they think 10 days is too long. Why? Because people buy our product as a gift to someone just a couple of days before the gifting date. 10 days is too long for shipping. Now you can see by the 5th why, we've got to the real cause of the problem. Now with all this information, you want to turn it into a persona. A persona is a fictional character that represents the characteristics of the group of people. So for instance, let's say we've got a loyalty scheme and we're trying to improve that loyalty scheme. You'd have one persona on people who are diehard fans and another persona on people who don't really use that loyalty scheme as much. Now I'm massively oversimplifying it, but as you can see, I am trying to group people around characteristics rather than by age or gender. One thing to keep in mind is that when you're interviewing people, people may not do what they actually say. Let's say I ask someone, do you recycle? They may feel under pressure or obliged to say yes, they do recycle. But when you actually do observe them, they probably don't. So it's really important that you observe people and you don't just focus on what they say. Actions speak much louder than words, folks. The next step is that you want to analyze all this data and actually come up with a set of problem statements. What are the real problems that you are trying to solve? And there's many different analysis techniques that you can use. One that I like to use is called journey mapping. For each persona, what I end up doing is that I understand what are the steps in the journey they take. So for instance, let's go back to the loyalty scheme. You'll have someone who firstly discovers the loyalty scheme, then they'll sign up, and then the next step would be, let's say they actually use the loyalty scheme, and then so on. Essentially, what you can do is that you can basically map all the problems at each stage, and you can understand what stages are, more problematic, for instance, or what are causing the most frustrations, and what are the moments that really matter for that end user. Once you overlay all the different personas, you can understand consistent set of problems or challenges that people find, and this could be the top priority ones, the ones that overlay the most, for instance. I often find that when I go into step 1, I have a set of assumptions in my mind of what the actual problems are, but by the time I got out into step 2, I realized that actually, hang on, these problems weren't actually the problems that I thought, and I was completely off. Now, you probably had an idea going into step 1 of what the problems are and the assumptions, but it's really important to keep an open mind, because often I find that by the time I come into step 2 and I realize that actually these are the problems, I'm like, hang on, these were definitely not the problems I thought in step 1. So you need to make sure that you have a really open mind where you're not manipulating the data to fit your problems that you think they were. Now that you know what problem that you want to solve is, you need to begin to come up with ideas and brainstorm, and you want to come up with as many ideas as you can. So this is the only time I am going to say quantity over quality. There's so many different ideation techniques that you want to use, like mind mapping, how might be statements, using inspiration from other companies, and basically you're trying to use all these techniques to help your clients stretch their imagination and step outside the box and come up with some really cool ideas. I would definitely say you want to do this in a big group, because you can kind of bounce around ideas and you can bounce off other people, but at the same time you can build on top of their ideas. Make sure you definitely use all the challenges you had in step 1 and basically turn them into opportunities and hence ideas that solve every single one of those challenges. And once you have all these ideas, you want to begin to prioritize those ideas and kind of narrow down which ideas that you want to take forward into the next step. It depends what's really important to your clients, but a really famous grid is ease of implementation versus the size of opportunity. Anything in this specific corner is going to be really high value and really, really easy to implement. So you kind of want to take these ideas first and foremost as high priority going into the next step. And that next step is basically where you prototype. A prototype is basically a version of the end solution that you're trying to build. And basically, you want to use this prototype to test with other people and understand what is working well, what's not working as well. So basically, this prototype can be digital, it could be a clickable prototype, it could even be a paper drawing. And believe it or not, James Dyson actually did 5,127 prototypes before he came up with the first Hoover, being Dyson's Hoover. And the final step is to test. And basically, you want to test that prototype, understand what's working really well, what's not working as well, and what needs to be improved. So basically, what you want to do is kind of go from experiments to facts to insights to conclusions. So firstly, experiments, we did this, to facts, and we found out this, and to insights, and this makes us think this, and conclusion being, so we will do this. Products that solve the most challenges are probably products that you want to take forward. Design thinking is a very non-linear process. It's very flexible, so you can go from one step to the other, and as you can see here, I can go from testing to ideate, prototype to ideate, and essentially you will be flicking backwards and forth between different stages, because once you get feedback, you will, let's say from testing, you will iterate that prototype and then build that prototype again, then test it again, and go backwards and forth until you've got something which really your customers want. I really hoped I proved that design is not just about how things look, but also how things work together, how things are used. And that's why the Googles and the Teslas spend so much money trying to perfect their design thinking process. And that's why they keep innovating and being ahead of competition, is because they're using processes like this to problem solve. And I really hoped I proved how valuable design thinking is by putting the needs of the user before the needs of the business. And that's it from this week. I hope you found this really interesting, and I will see you next week.